A viral video alleging widespread daycare fraud in Minnesota was amplified by Trump allies and directly preceded a federal freeze on childcare funding. So what exactly happened here? My name is Kat Tenbarge. I'm an independent journalist with COURIER, and I also write the newsletter Spitfire News. Today, I'm looking at a viral YouTube video that had massive consequences on federal funding to some of Minnesota's most vulnerable children. So this is how 23-year-old Nick Shirley actually got started on YouTube. As you can see, before he was covering these inflammatory political topics, he was covering stuff that an average teenager might be a little bit more interested in. You can see here that he was talking about other popular YouTube celebrities like Jake Paul and Tana Mojo, and that he was doing these challenges that, for those who are familiar with Mr. Beast, this might look pretty similar to what super viral YouTubers were doing at the time. Pranks, challenges, sneaking into places. But the problem is these videos were not getting the sort of sky-high views that Nick Shirley has been able to get in recent weeks by pushing inflammatory and even racist rhetoric about Minnesotans and people in the Somali community. So looking at Shirley's most popular videos, you can see that a lot of them are over the past year, and they play on a lot of the racist fear-mongering that has become central to conservative rhetoric and ideology in the Trump 2.0 era. So as you can see, some of his most popular videos are about things like COURIER, the brutal El Salvadoran prison, where the Trump administration has sent Americans without due process to suffer in heinous, physically abusive conditions. A lot of these videos also demonize immigrants, casting them as people who are in the country illegally, whether we actually know that to be true or not. And as you start to watch Shirley's videos, you find out that they really rest on this idea that the viewership is coming in with a preconceived bias, maybe things that they've heard from sources like Fox News or other conservative media outlets. And what he's doing is not necessarily investigative journalism, but rather creating clips in an order that makes it seem like those preconceived opinions are right. So let me show you what I mean. The video that has captured so much attention over the past couple of weeks is one where Shirley titles it, "I investigated Minnesota's billion-dollar fraud scandal." So from the get-go, he's operating under the assumption that there is a billion-dollar fraud scandal and that he's going to sort of quote-unquote prove it through documenting the reality of what's happening at these Minnesotan daycares. The problem is he doesn't do the legwork to actually justify the conclusion. He works backwards, starting with this idea that the Somali community in particular is stealing money from taxpayers. And rather than prove that, he's just sort of lining up emotional clips in a way that makes the viewer feel like it's being proved to them. So let's watch the beginning of this video where he teases some of what's ahead.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. What do you guys think about the fraud that's taking place here in Minnesota?
I don't think anybody is enabling fraud to happen.
Hold Governor Walz accountable for this.
What was this money spent on? 1.26 million. What was that money spent on? There aren't any kids.
Answer the question. Are there children?
Okay, so just there in the first few seconds, you already have several examples of this bias seeping through and crafting a narrative without any actual evidence. For example, he introduces some of these people on screen as Somali fraudsters without any evidence whatsoever that these people are committing fraud. And as you watch the video itself, which is over 40 minutes long, you'll find that there is no evidence these people are committing fraud. Throughout the video, Shirley is tallying supposed amounts of fraud without justifying it in any way. And you can also tell throughout these various sort of conversations or confrontations that he's having with people who may or may not even work at these daycare centers, he's not a lot of times even going inside. He's just standing outside various daycare centers and really aggressively asking people on the street, asking people around the building if they've seen any children there, if they know about the fraud, if they care about the fraud. Meanwhile, the reality of the fraud happening in the Minnesota system and around the country is a lot more complicated than Nick Shirley makes it appear. So one of the things that's pretty disheartening about Shirley's viral video is that if you read the comments and read a lot of the responses to this video online, you will see thousands of people saying that this is real journalism. And a lot of times they're sort of maligning or lambasting local news in Minnesota for not covering these stories, when the reality is local journalists have been covering these stories. They've been doing real reporting, which Shirley is not. There are several fundamental tenets of journalism that are completely unexplored in Shirley's video, which is more of a gotcha style, like pseudo-documentary filming that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a minute. The reality of the situation is these daycare centers have been visited by government representatives to ensure that they are operating as normal. In this article from NPR News, which is a local outlet, we can see that the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families did conduct compliance checks on the childcare centers that were in this viral video, and they found them operating as expected. Now, like I said, throughout the video, Shirley doesn't actually go inside the childcare centers, and he's not allowed to go in them, which makes a lot of sense considering he doesn't introduce himself. He isn't a real journalist, and why would you let a random man with a camera come into a location with children? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the way that the video is shot and styled and edited makes it look like it's a really damning portrayal of this system. I also want to mention that while there have been examples of fraud in the Minnesota system, that does not mean that what Shirley found in his video is accurate or journalistic in any way, nor does it create the justification for what happened next. Unfortunately, after Shirley's video went viral, with tons of conservative influencers and people in Trump's orbit pushing it across social media platforms, the Trump administration ended up cracking down on Minnesota's childcare system, cutting funding, freezing it because of this alleged fraud that was never actually proven. If this sounds familiar, it's because at the beginning of Trump's second term last year, he plucked Elon Musk without being an elected official to unilaterally decide to slash funding across the federal government through this example of supposed fraud that was happening in these various areas. So Elon Musk used the platform of X and his unofficial government arm Doge to identify supposed cases of fraud and use that as the justification to cut funding. The reality of that has been incredibly bleak. People have gone hungry, children have gone without care, medical supplies globally have been decimated, and many, many, many people have died because of these cuts to funding. So the fake reality that's being put on display here is this idea that people are stealing taxpayer money and getting rich and running away with it. The reality that's not shown in Nick Shirley's video is that children are now going to be left without necessary resources for, in some cases, their survival. And that is a real story of government fraud and corruption occurring that is not being framed in this way whatsoever by this pseudo YouTube journalist. Now, I wanted to touch on the idea of pseudo-YouTube journalism again here, because I think it's a really important part of this story that a lot of outlets are not really considering or covering. I grew up on YouTube, like a lot of people in my generation, so I've seen countless examples of this. And one that comes to mind from the tail end of last decade is when the YouTuber Shane Dawson got tens of millions of views on videos that were supposedly documentaries into other YouTubers like Jake Paul, who Nick Shirley made videos about too at the beginning of his career, documentaries into supposed conspiracies like flat earth theory, and documentaries into YouTube drama and scandal on the platform. I grew up watching this stuff, and even back then, I knew that it did not pass the smell test. People like Shane Dawson and Nick Shirley, they're not actual journalists. They're not even real documentary filmmakers. They don't follow any of the norms or ethics that ensure reporting is fair and accurate, which results in these extremely biased, really manipulative portrayals of people, things, and events. And unfortunately, it's no longer just about YouTube beauty drama or the latest eyeshadow palette or YouTube controversy. Today, this style of pseudo filmmaking, pseudo documentarianism on YouTube actually influences what the federal government is doing. Now, another question to consider is, knowing that the Trump administration has been pushing this type of rhetoric against immigrant communities for the entirety of its existence, was this viral video just a useful justification to do something they had wanted to do for a while? I'll leave that up for you to think about, but what I'm the most concerned for moving forward is not only the vulnerable communities in Minnesota that have to deal with this, but also how much this style of viral content is going to affect our political landscape moving forward. And the last thing I have to mention is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Tim Walz really entered the national political stage when he ran as Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee. But after the election, he returned to his post as Minnesota governor and has been facing relentless attacks on his character, on his state, and on the communities within it from Trump and the federal government ever since. After this viral stunt from Nick Shirley, Tim Walz announced that he will not be seeking re-election for a third term as governor. And this is all occurring amid these conservative, racist rhetorical attacks on people in the state, which he linked to as one possible reason for why he made this decision. Unfortunately, what that looks like for a lot of conservatives online is something more like a victory lap. They're celebrating Tim Walz stepping down, and they're celebrating the impact that Nick Shirley's video has had. This is not the first time we've seen this. I think back to Project Veritas, a conservative propaganda outlet that has fought against issues like abortion access by creating these extremely manipulative propaganda videos that falsely implicate everyday people in some sort of fraudulent or criminal activity. As long as people online look at what Nick Shirley is doing as real journalism instead of the actual reporting of local journalists in their communities, we're going to continue to have this problem. Because think back to what I showed you at the beginning of this video, Nick Shirley's original YouTube view counts versus the millions of views he's receiving now. Part of the problem is that platforms like YouTube incentivize this type of inflammatory content. Nick Shirley even has an ad on his video for AI clipping technology that's helping to fund him in addition to all of the attention and views and likely advertising dollars that he has since received. So these platforms incentivize this type of behavior. It is ultimately up to us as news consumers to be more discerning in what we see as actual journalism and what we use to inform our political stances and how we feel about people in our communities.